Hi, my name is Danisha Gupta, and I'm the current co-outreach coordinator of AIC's Emerging Conservation Professionals Network. This video is a follow-up Q&A to our webinar on November 30th, 2012, entitled Considering Your Future Career Path Working in Private Practice. Our speakers will address all questions that we did not have time for during the original webinar. As you know, our speakers are Rosa Lowinger, Principal and Senior Conservator of Rosa Lowinger and Associates, which specializes in object sculpture architecture, Julia Brennan, Owner and Chief Conservator of Textile Conservation Services, and Paul Messier, President and Head Conservator of Paul Messier LLC, Conservation of Photographs and Works on Paper. We also have Eliza Spalding, ECPN Vice Chair, with us to help us run this Q&A smoothly. We have 15 follow-up questions, and each speaker will alternate taking the lead on a question. So Rosa, let's start with you. The idea of starting a private practice can be daunting. How would you begin this practice? What do you think are key steps in starting a private practice? And how did you start to get your name out there when you started your own practices?
Well, to begin, the key thing to starting a private practice is having a private job. I think for many people it starts with a project, and that's certainly how it started with me. You were working in a museum environment, and I got a private project, and so that's how it starts. I mean, there are many different ways. Don't forget, I started my practice in the 1980s. There weren't very many private conservators at the time, so I think this varies, but I think the first way I would suggest that people decide to start a private practice is that you kind of define what it is that you want, and all the issues that Paul and Julia and I raised earlier about wanting more control over your time, etc. And knowing, though, that that is going to be a bigger work time commitment for yourself, and letting that be the thing that guides you into going into private practice. Then you have to start to get clients. But the first thing, it always starts with a client or a project. And then you do it, and then you see if you like it. I mean, there's a very long series of things that one can do. Getting your name out there is just a process with the people that you know, with the people that you work with the client that you did the work for. That's why it makes sense always to make sure that every project that you do comes out well and that your customer service is impeccable, because it always starts with that that thing, with people getting to know you by the work that you've done, and one person recommends you to another one, your colleagues recommend you. Make yourself known to the other private conservators in town. Make it clear to them that you are there, that you want to do work, and that you are not going to compete with them, but that you're available to assist as well. That's another thing you can do. I could go on about this, but I'd like to give Paul and Julia a chance to weigh in.
Go ahead, Julia.
Are you muted?
Yeah, Julia, sorry, we can't hear you.
Uh-oh.
Well, I can continue talking while we're waiting for Julia's
Okay.
mic. Or Paul, do you want to? Why don't you talk, Paul?
Okay. So the key steps in starting a private practice, I think, just to echo, I think you have to be just really confident that it's going to succeed, because it's not easy. At least it wasn't easy for me, in the first couple of years. I think after the second year, I knew I was going to make it, but that first year, it was really touch and go. And you just have to be stubborn, believe in yourself, and just be confident. It's easy to kind of get down, especially when a lot of your peers seem to be doing well at their conventional jobs, and they're going on courier trips while you're like, hitting the bricks looking for work. So just believe it's going to work and stay confident, I guess.
Julia, we can't hear you, and I'm not sure if there's an unmute button that you can hit.
Hi, Julia. The unmute button is in the top right corner.
I see it, thanks.
Okay.
There you are. You're back.
Sorry. Okay, you guys, sorry about the technology. I agree with Rosa. I would reiterate how important the word of mouth is. That when all the work we do, essentially, I think most of my referrals come from word of mouth, either from other clients or from other colleagues. And so doing a good job following up with people is super important. Also, to start your own business, you have to have a little capital. You just can't decide you're not going to do it without a dime. So whether it's $10,000 or $5,000 or something, you've got to draw up a small plan and say, I'm going to put this much into telecommunications, this much into outreach, this much into a new camera, this much into supplies, and bare bones it. So that's also a consideration. Okay, that's all.
That's a really important point.
Okay, Julia, your next question. How many years of experience after grad school are advisable before starting a private practice?
Well, I think it depends what you've done before you went to graduate school. Because, I mean, currently I have someone working with me who's now going into their third year of essentially a paid apprenticeship with me. And so by the time they do go to graduate school, they're going to have so much hands-on experience in not only a whole variety of textile treatments and surveys and site work, but also in managing a small business, everything from A to Z. So I would say that having some sort of really good hands-on work experience, and I would call it an apprenticeship, because you're really learning with a master or with a mentor, for at least 3 to 5 years is really important, and it gives you the whole kind of focus that backs up or precedes your formal training. So that's really, I think that hands-on apprenticeshipping and experience with different conservators who have their own practices or regional labs is super important. And that way you also see how other people run their businesses, and you can build your confidence and extract from that, bless you, the good and the not as good aspects that you'd like to emulate or you'd like to diverge from. So that would be my advice.
Does anyone else want to chime in?
Rosa, I could.
Go ahead. Take it.
Okay. So, I had 3 years after grad school experience, and I was somewhat prepared, I would say. I was the head of a regional center paper conservation lab, which, for all intents and purposes, was running a business. I mean, that's just what it is. And so that was good. I was the head of that lab, like I said, so I, had to supervise people. I understood what that kind of meant. That was really good experience, good preparation. And like Julia said, I also had some very good pre-program experience. I had about 3 years in a private practice, which really opened my eyes to the pros and cons. So I kind of knew what I was getting myself into.
And my thinking is similar. I think that Julia makes a really good point that you need about 3 to 5 years of experience working in conservation. If you get some of that before, that's fine. Some of it after, but really you should not think that you could come out of graduate school without any prior experience working in the private sector and think you can start a private practice. Even if you've got 2 years in a museum before, I think it would be really difficult to come right out of school and do that. The experience really helps. Not only that, I think that as a profession, I mean, there's 2 components to this. One is that for you it would be very difficult to do that, to run a successful and an ethically based private practice if you don't have some experience under your belt either before or after. But more importantly, as a profession, we are trying to raise the overall bar of what we do. And generally speaking, traditionally, when I started out in private practice, and for the last, say, not in the last 10 years, but before that, you had a split. You had museum conservators that were very professionally trained and private conservators that were, for the most part, trained in any number of different ways. I think those of us who have professionalized the field and are now in private practice are trying to make sure that that bar stays high. And it's important to know that if you come right out of school and open a private practice without any prior experience, it's not a good thing.
Paul, what are the major differences between working in a private practice versus an institutional practice? Are there certain characteristics that help one be successful in private practice, and if so, what are they?
So, I think I thought about this question a little bit, and I kept coming back to a relationship with a collection. And I think that's one of the things that I miss the most about being in private practice, is I'm not the custodian of a specific collection. I can't, look at the impact of treatment over a long period of time, or I don't have the benefit of, let's just monitor this for the first show and the first exhibition and see how this condition issue goes. That would be ideal, I think, for me in a lot of ways. I mean, I really love objects. I love photographic prints, and having that relationship with specific kind of singular objects that you tend over a long period of time is something I do miss, and so that's a difference. I have a great collection here, but it's only here for 3 months or whatever, 6 months, whatever my backlog is, and it's right back out the door. And if I ever see that object again, it's probably not under necessarily the best of circumstances. Things do come back for tune-ups over time, and it's, with clients that can sometimes be a bit of a contentious issue. So in many cases, when they leave, the objects leave, I kind of hope I never see them again. That sort of is true, I guess. So that's one part. I think the other part that's kind of a bright line that separates people in private practice from institutional practice is if you're not comfortable treating things, I think there are models for private practice where you can be like a consultant and do surveys and all of that, and I think getting into sort of preventive conservation issues and things of that nature. So I think there are models that are out there in private practice that are not so heavily treatment reliant, but I think that's the exception. I think if you're not comfortable around objects in your hands and you don't have the confidence to treat something, it's going to be a tough fit. And I think in institutions, it's not like people do a lot of treatments in institutions, but it's not like in private practice. It just is not. And then I think there's a big temperament thing, and I'm not sure if I can put my finger on it really, but I definitely think that there is people in private practice are different. I think they just are. I don't know. I like to think that I'm independent and creative and all that stuff. I don't know what I am, but I am different from an institutional conservator. That's for sure. They would probably think that I'm a pain in the neck to work with and unmanageable. And I think I probably should own that too. I haven't had a job. I feel like I haven't had a job in 15 years, and I'm not sure I could have a job now. Go back and go work for the man. So I don't know. I guess that's it. The summary is a relationship with the collection. You have to be confident in your treatment capabilities, I think, and then there's a temperament difference. And I'm not. Again, I don't claim to be the authority on what that temperament difference really is. Comments?
Yes,
My colleagues.
I have one. I think Paul's right about that issue of not having that long-term stewardship relationship with a collection. You can have that with individual clients, so that if you have certain clients that you really, nurture and give them a price break and do all that with, so that you can have that long-term. But I think one of the big differences, and I'm going to see if Paul and Julia agree with me on this, as a private conservator, you work harder. You just work harder. you work longer and you work harder. Now you can work whenever you want. Like there's many a time that I'm writing reports in my pajamas in my bed. That is my preferred place to write reports, and I can do that. But oftentimes I'm working, at 6 in the morning and I'm done at 10 at night, but I've made that choice. So one of the things about private conservation is it's your baby. It sinks or swims because of you. So you just work harder. When museum conservators tell me, oh, we have this tight exhibition schedule and we have so much to do, it still seems to me like a vacation compared to the hours that I put in. But, the payoff is that it's yours.
Right. Yeah.
Great. Rosa, what percentage of your time are you conducting treatment and what percentage is devoted to administrative work?
Well, I have a very particular type of business in that my business is pretty big and I run big projects, so I administer a lot. But I have administrators that administer. Like, for example, I have a person that does billing, that does insurance. That we have amazingly complicated insurance requirements because we work on site at government buildings and that sort of thing. So I don't do that stuff. Somebody else does that. What I spend a lot of my time doing is going to look at projects, getting the work, writing the major proposals, especially the complicated ones. And even though my practice is large in that I have 3 full-time conservators in addition to myself and a bunch of technicians, I troubleshoot every single project. I opine on every project, I weigh in on every project, and I give advice or we bat the ideas around. That's what's fun. But I'm not sure I gave you the percentages. If I didn't have a staff of people that did that stuff, I would say a good 50% of my time would be in administrative things.
This is Julia. I would say that my breakout time is probably 50-50. I spend 50% on administration and 50% on treatment. And it depends on what projects are, in the swing. Sometimes I have to spend more time on administrative. We get a lot of year-end requests from foundations, organizations, institutions that have money to spend, and at that time of year, I'm only doing administrative work, for example. But I try to keep a balance because I actually really like the hands-on work, and if I spend too many days in a row just doing administration, I kind of go bonkers. So I keep my own balance. I try to do that. And like Rosa, I've got some backup, not as much as you do. Bookkeeper, tax person, accountant, that kind of stuff, so that end of the business is tidy and organized. But I do all the proposals and site work and a lot of the final treatment stuff. But I train people to do that with me as well. I think that's a really important part of actually apprenticeship and training is the documentation and the management of the business. So I try to spread that around a bit.
Should I jump in?
Very quickly.
Very quickly. Well, no, I don't have to. Go ahead. Go next.
Okay, sounds good. Julia, how do you establish the cost of projects, and what issues do you think are important to establish the cost of a project?
Okay, I think establishing cost of projects, again, is a matter of experience. And I have to say that I've gotten much, much better at it over 15 or 20 years. I really lost my shirt on some early projects, and that I would call a learning curve. And even to this day, I sometimes will look at a textile, a very large textile, hanging on a wall. I can't examine every detail of it, and it's really hard to estimate. And I have to put some caveats into my contract and say, at a certain point, we have to reassess. There is probably going to be an increase in the cost. But basic rule of thumb that I follow is basically time and materials. And materials and also outsourcing of any other kinds of services, like people that would deinstall and reinstall the work, art transport and handling, and I call certain companies, they provide me with the quotes, and I add that as part of the overall contract. Textiles are not a high value art item by and large. I have a lot of small samplers, christening dresses, embroideries that people find in old trunks, things that come back from holidays. They bought them for $50 or $100, or it's a family christening dress that has no monetary value. It's only sentimental. And I have found that it's very hard with my 70-year-old clients to say that it's going to cost $1,000 to clean and treat your christening dress. So I think uh, a lot of times I will try to really combine and reduce some of the costs for a project like that. And on the smaller projects, I don't even charge for documentation. I've come up with a basic model and a report that is so straightforward that it takes me less than 20 minutes to do it with the photography. So I absorb that because I just don't want to add more charges to a job that's going to be, under $500, for example. And I do plenty of work that's under $500. I think that on larger projects and really huge scale textiles that require 2 or 3 people just to physically handle or move, or we're working on site at government buildings and institutions, and I'm dealing with big contracts, I tend to add a certain percentage because of the amount of paperwork and administration I'm going to have to do on that, just the paperwork. So I've learned that, and I've learned that probably more recently as I've had more larger government contracts. The first time you spend 3 hours on the phone with some government assistant in Utah helping you file an invoice, you realize you either got to do a learning curve or you've got to add a little bit so that these things don't become administrative heavy.
Paul, what kinds of costs were involved with starting your practice? Did you need to take out loans to get started?
Yes, I took out this was a bit of a farce, but I took out a $10,000 like small business loan, and I think I burned through that in about 3 weeks or something because I had these delusions of grandeur. I needed equipment and I needed everything, and I thought maybe that was going to last me 6 months. It probably lasted me 6 weeks. So that was that. But at least I had some stuff. I had a nice filing cabinet and a desk chair and some trays to wash stuff. Then I maxed out my credit cards, frankly, and just that was it. I mean, in terms of the cost, ultimately, startup. I'm not necessarily sure I did it the best way. I think that you definitely do need some capital, that's for sure. But I think if you can and I didn't do this, and this made it harder. But if you can manage through your network to bring in one sort of inaugural project that will pay the bills for 3, 4, 5 months. And it might take you a year and a half to find that project and set it all up. That's a smarter way to do it than I did it. I was, financially not in great shape for at least a year and a half. And like I said, basically around the second year, I had enough repeat clients that I knew I wasn't going to starve to death. So that can be scary. I strongly recommend, if you can, set yourself up with a big project at the outset. That's the way to go, instead of enduring all the stress of waiting for the phone to ring, kind of thing.
I want to just weigh in on that, because I agree with you that it's best to set up with a big project. But Paul, what you're describing is not really so bad. Think about it. You're talking about in the second year, you were feeling, that's, for a small business, that's remarkable. There's no other, small business where you could really say that of. So though it feels very difficult to you, it's a great success story, that you
That's really kind, and that's a great perspective, and that's a really useful reminder. When I was, It was a stressful time. My wife and I mean, not to get way too personal, we're having our first baby. I had just quit my job, which was like crazy, and then she started grad school. So she went to grad school, and so it was like, oh my God, just too much at once. We were just way in a rush to get started on the next thing, and it was a little bit stressful. But you're absolutely right. I mean, kept at it, focused, and yeah, year and a half. That's nothing. Good point.
Okay. Rosa, what kind of relationships do you try to maintain with other private conservators in your specialty, people that would be considered your greatest competitors? Does anyone collaborate with other private conservators in their specialties?
This is a great question, and I'm glad you asked it. I make a point of really trying to maintain good relationships with my colleagues and competitors in the cities that I work. It's not always easy, and I can't say I've always been successful, especially with, see, I've been in business for so long that, for example, in certain cities, Los Angeles, like pretty much of 5 private conservators and objects, 3 of them have worked for me, and before they set up their private businesses. And it hasn't always worked out in that situation. However, I really feel it's important to try to get beyond competition and try to develop collegiality. And I have had some very good success with that. And in my later years of practice, like in the last 10 years, I've made a really big point of that because, first of all, there's enough work, At least right now there's enough work, at least in the places where I'm working. And those relationships with your colleagues can be so rewarding. In Miami, we just collaborated with one of our biggest nationwide competitors on something, and we've worked very hard to have a great relationship with them, and it has been infinitely rewarding. And the same thing in LA. There's a conservation practice here, Silver Lake Conservation, that they worked for me once and now have their own private practice, but we're incredibly close colleagues and collaborate all the time. So I encourage people to try to do that as much as possible.
Yeah.
Julia, what responsibility do conservators have in contacting contemporary living artists, i.e. any legal reasons of due diligence?
I'm not exactly sure about the legal responsibilities, but I'd say personally, when I work on any textile that is a contemporary fiber art or it's made by a living artist, I think it's a respectful and a thorough approach if you contact the artist, because sometimes they can provide you with valuable information on materials and process, adhesives that they've used. Some of the living artists tend to be really engaged in the process and others are not, but I like to include it as part of the dossier of my conservation exploration and the history. So beyond that, I don't have any further comment.
I do.
Go ahead.
You definitely have to be careful about contacting a living artist because while some may be very engaged and some disengaged, some may be present obstacles. And you need to be careful with your client first. Before you actually reach out to a living artist, you need to find out a little bit about what that living artist's response has been to previous conservation. You need to get the permission of your client to do that, and they have to be part of the process of contacting the living artist, because if the living artist comes back at you and says, this piece is no longer viable, you don't want that to be on your shoulders.
Yeah.
Paul, every space has its inconveniences, but identifying them takes experience. Does the panel have any examples of hindering pitfalls a space might have based on his or her experience?
Maybe I'm a little too hung up on the startup experience, but I mean, I kind of made my first mistake on space. I really, and it wasn't just even space. It was like address. I didn't feel like I could afford to be in a bad neighborhood, a neighborhood that I could afford. And so I ended up trying to get, I ended up in a neighborhood that was a good neighborhood outside of Boston, very expensive neighborhood, and that was not smart. People don't have any great expectations when they come to visit you in your studio, and in fact, I learned that most of my clients can't be bothered coming to my studio. They have the work couriered over, and they don't. It doesn't matter. So don't get hung up on, you need a prestige address or you need a prestige space. I kind of did that, and that was a mistake. Then I went in completely the opposite direction, and I bought my first house, and the house had a finished attic, and it was tiny, and that's where the business was. And I had 3 full-time employees in this tiny little space that was just insanely small. I mean, you could barely turn around without bumping into someone. So that didn't work out either. I sort of went in extreme in that direction. So now, I mean, basically where I am now is with my senior employee, the person who's been with me for 15 whatever years. We bought a 2-family house in a decent neighborhood of Boston, but not a prestige address by any means, a real kind of working class area. We bought a 2-family house. She lives downstairs, and the top 2 floors are the studio, and the sort of the top story is the office where I am now. So it's kind of a creative solution. I would never, it's not a prestige solution. It's almost basically invisible from the street, no sign. You would never know what goes on up here, and that's exactly the way I like it. So I'm not sure that answers the question about space. It's more about, for me, it's more about overhead and recognizing what you can pay for and what value you're getting out of what you're paying for. It might surprise you that, you may never see your client coming to your studio ever, ever, ever. So just make it practical and affordable.
Can I add to that, Julia? I would say that for me at least, and I have a home-based studio, and it's small. It's 40 by 20. And then I have a separate small place where I can store supplies, non-artifacts. So that keeps a lot of the supply stuff out of the studio. But I would say that, depending on what your area of conservation is, you need to have flexible space. You need to have doors that are big enough to accommodate the kinds of mounts or artifacts that are coming in and out. In my case, because I work on some large textiles, I need a really high ceiling. So half of my studio has a 20-foot ceiling, and then the other half doesn't. And the other thing is, in my business, I have a lot of clients coming by. As I said earlier, I have a lot of low-cost, small projects, and in order to keep my costs down, I don't travel to people's personal houses to pick up a christening dress. They make an appointment. I usually schedule 1 day a week where clients come and bring things so that it's not disrupting work time all the time. And so having a nice studio with a really good vibe and a really happy space to work in, and I can't tell you how many clients walk in and say, "What a beautiful space. You're so lucky to work here." But it's because I'm in there all the time. I want it to be a good, happy space. So I've worked to create a space that not only works practically and is flexible, and I can move everything around, tables, roller racks. I can rearrange it in a million different ways, but also so that the light is gorgeous and it just feels good. It feels good during a snowstorm, on a rainy day, on a sunny day. So to me, that's really important.
I agree, by the way, and without taking too much more time on this topic, I totally agree with both Paul and Julia, and I think that is so true. You have to have a space that's pleasant to work in and that serves your needs. And I think these creative solutions are the best ones. Sometimes in the type of work I do, big objects, people have these big spaces with gantries and whatnot, and that would be great. It would raise my overhead enormously. I have 2 home-based studios, one in Miami and one in Los Angeles. Very few clients visit. When we do big sculpture, they fit in some of them fit, some of them don't, and then we have relationships with art transport firms where we do the work there on certain pieces. But having these creative solutions is great, and in particular, I like the idea that here's one. We're all worried about theft. you know, of course. And if you have these situations where somebody is sleeping in the building, it beats any alarm system and any other kind of thing that you can have. So
especially she has a dog, which Diane does downstairs. Yeah.
exactly, and you know, Julia, you live in your space. You know, you live where you work, and I do. So it's really nice.
Yeah. I mean, just one little follow up, very briefly, is I think it's easy when you're young. There's a little, and you're starting something new. There's a little bit of insecurity, and I was kind of overcompensating, I think, when I was young. I was trying to kind of be something that I really wasn't, and when I came to space, I was trying to kind of emulate, you know, conservation labs that I knew. And that's just not, I mean, at the beginning, that's just, one, it's not necessary, and two, it's not realistic. So just put that out of your mind and just let it evolve organically more than, you know, getting yourself saddled with some big upfront costs to maintain.
Right. Right.
Julia, this question was specifically for you. This participant asked that they wanted to hear how Julia got involved teaching abroad. Does she work with an institution or organization?
Well, I have to say it was, you know, a little bit of luck and pluck. As you know, I was born and raised in Southeast Asia, and so, you know, after some years of kind of getting things established in my practice and raising children, and they were about to go off to college, you know, I was fortunate enough to go back to Asia, and it was through some of those just personal trips that were focused on textiles, in fact, because that is the underlying motivation and passion of my life, that I met people who expressed interest in needing assistance with preservation and collection care and preventative conservation. And so I would say that it's really that my overarching interest in textiles, it's, you know, kept me involved in local museums, in small historical societies. I do a lot of outreach. I do a lot of free public lectures and writing. I reach out to people not because it's, you know, because it's a profitable thing to do or that it necessarily is going to network me in a specific direction, but because I really care about it. And so I've been fortunate that that's kind of the way it's evolved. And my projects in Bhutan ended up being picked up by a philanthropist out west who was very interested in promoting this and was able to get the funding from the Getty. And again, through another colleague, I did work for the State Department when they have needed someone with a textile specific focus. I guess it's just, you know, I don't know. I have to say, it's my passion in getting out there and being accessible and available to people. And I'll tell you, I get so many emails of people asking me about things. A lot of times it's just simply goodwill that I answer and try to give people guidance and information. And I think that all of that builds to just provide, you know, possibilities of other projects in the future.
Rosa, what sort of advice can you offer to a conservator practicing in a rural area where there are more than enough opportunities for object preservation, but limited access to collaboration with other conservators? How can one overcome this obstacle?
My recommendation on this is based on work that I've done, and my suggestion is reach out to other private conservators in your specialty who are not working in that area, but that you know, that you like, that could work with you. For example, rather than you're brand new, you're just entering the field, and you move to wherever, someplace where there aren't a lot of conservators, but you know some conservators in cities within a few 100 miles, or somebody that you like very much, because once you get on a plane, it doesn't really matter if you're flying from New York to Omaha or from, you know, Las Vegas to Omaha. It doesn't really make that big a difference. So what you should do is just find someone that you trust, a mentor that you like to work with, and have them be the person, like work for them in that city for a while, and then slowly but surely you can start the practice yourself. I've got that collaborative experience with a couple of people, and I think it works really well, because then you get, as the mentor, My feeling is I don't need to take over the world. I don't need to have a practice that extends into every corner. At the beginning, when someone is young, I do believe that if I'm the one that's the responsible conservator, the project should be under the aegis of my practice. But the idea is to help train somebody to do it on their own.
Okay. Paul, if I am unable to take on a particular project because I am working on another lengthy project, how can I make sure I don't lose the client that I cannot take on at the moment and that he or she will wait until I can take them on? Oh, Paul, I think you're muted.
Okay. So, I don't really agree with the premise of the question, to be honest. In other words, I think the premise of the question is, oh, I've got this, I'm really busy and I can't do this big project, and how do I not lose that client? Well, the way you don't lose that client is you take on the project and do the best you can. You scramble, you figure out a way to get it done. I mean, I've never, honestly, maybe it's bad business practice, I don't know, but the bottom line is, if there's an opportunity, it's coming my way, I'm interested in it, I can possibly do it, I figure it out. That's what I'm here to do. I'm here to solve problems, and that's it. So, my advice would be, before you think about trying to maintain a relationship by letting a client and a project slip away, think about not letting it slip away in the first place. Just trying to get on it and trying to manage it one way or another. It goes back to what Rosa says. If you have to work 14-hour days, whatever, figure it out.
Can I weigh in?
Yeah.
This is Julia. I have a specific size business and staff and physical space. And so I do sometimes limit the kinds of projects I work on, both by my skill set. There are particular kinds of treatments I don't undertake. I don't have the background and the experience to do them, therefore I refer them to other colleagues. Or secondly, it might just be a huge project that would take me out of town or inconvenience the rest of the work in my studio, and so I decide I'm not going to bid on it. So I actually sort of consciously am trying to keep my business at a certain level. I don't want it to be ginormous. So I do pass things up. They're not regular repeat clients, but it might be a new institutional client or a government contract that I really evaluate the scope of work, and sometimes I decide it's not within really my best interest to pursue that.
Let me weigh in, may I? I'm with Paul. I kind of take it on, and we figure out how to get it done, and we try to be realistic with the client and explain to them. We try to be honest with, we don't try to be. We are honest with the client. Look, we have a backlog. We're really busy, but we enjoy working for you, and we want to take this project on, and we'll do our best to work it in. But we try as hard as possible not to give it up.
Great. Rosa, how do private conservators purchase the appropriate chemicals without institutional support, and what pieces of equipment were a good investment when just starting out, obviously varying from specialty to specialty?
Well, you can purchase chemicals. The problem is not the purchasing of the chemicals, it's the delivery to a home address. That's where it becomes tricky. A lot of things can't be delivered to a home address. So we just either have them delivered to an institution that we work with, or this is where your collegial relationships with your fellow conservators who have practices that are in industrial areas work out. So that's what we do. It's not the purchasing, it's where it's delivered. Then there's the other problem of California, that California has all these regulations about what chemicals can and can't be used, and you just have to work within them. In terms of equipment, a camera, some tape, I agree with Paula, not to go hog wild on top of the line stuff. When you start, what you want to buy that's good are the things that you're going to work with for a long time. So you buy a good camera, first of all, and you get, to me, a good toolkit, like a toolkit that has good scalpels, spatulas. I mean, these things add up. A good toolkit is a $500 investment at least in terms of everything you might need to go on site. For objects conservation, you need hand tools. You need a good drill. You need a good set of hand tools, hammers, saws, screwdrivers, all that sort of thing. So that's where you put your money initially. And now you obviously need things like tables and chairs and lights, but my feeling is at the beginning, go cheap. Go to thrift shops, go to, Home Depot for that. Because later, as it goes on, then you can say, oh, I'd love a table that's 48 by 70 and then have that built. But at the beginning, spend your money on the things that you're going to keep for a long time.
Julia, as a beginning conservator, it takes me longer to do treatments than conservators who have years of experience. How should one account for this when writing proposals and charging for work? Should one charge at a lower hourly rate because the treatment will take longer, or should one charge the market rate and just mentally budget the extra time needed for the project?
I think this is a question that all three of us need to weigh in on. I have to say, from my perspective, I'll reiterate again that a lot of the artifacts that I work on are not high value. The market is lower on those things. People don't walk into my studio with $200,000 and $300,000 paintings. It's just different. So we've always been the low man on the totem pole, and there's an awful lot of very personally owned, intimate textiles, and so I'm not exactly sure how to answer this, and I have a feeling that what I'm going to say now, my esteemed colleagues Paul and Rose are going to disagree with. And when you're beginning out, I think that a beginning conservator can't charge the same as a conservator that's been in private practice for 20 years. I just think that's the way it is. I think if you've had almost no experience and you come out of school and you're charging $150 an hour, I think it may not reflect your skill level and your experience. So I don't see anything wrong in having a lower rate until you've established yourself and you're confident to raise your rate. In terms of taking longer to do things, I think you have to swallow and absorb your own learning curve. I don't think you can pass that on to the client, and you have to have reasonable hours for treatment. If you think that cleaning a small textile or a small drawing or photograph generally takes 4 to 5 hours in the marketplace, you can't be charging 15 hours because you're not set up properly or it's going to take that long to do it. So I think you can't inflate the costs because you're slower. I think that that's something you have to absorb, and as time goes on, you'll become more efficient and you can raise your rates. So that's basically my bottom line. I'd be very surprised if the people that work with me who only have, say, 2 years experience went out and started charging $100 an hour. They're just not there yet. And there's a difference in rate fees where you work and live in the country and what kind of material you're working on.
Right.
And I know this from looking at comparative charts. My painting conservator colleagues generally charge more per hour than a lot of the textile people, unless you're in a big lab.
Than everybody.
So those are my comments, but I think it's just an area that, I don't know, I think you have to, first of all, I think you have to be doing this because you're passionate about it and you love it. And you have to have a little bit of a monetary cushion so that not every hour and dollar you're making is going to support your business in the beginning. You're going to make mistakes. Hopefully they're not on the artifacts, but you're going to not make profit all the time. And so as you gain experience and get better, you will.
I agree, by the way. I agree with what you're saying.
Go ahead, Rose. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Paul. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I agree. I do agree. I think there's a fine line. We had this discussion last time about undercutting, and I think there is a fine line between kind of, not even a fine line. I think it's a pretty clear line between undercutting and charging something that's realistic, based on your level of skills and all of that. I don't think that. So I agree with what Julia was saying about you have to maybe charge a rate commensurate with your skill level and experience level. And so that's a complex mix. But I think that is just the reality of pricing. I think pricing is a really complex issue. I mean, sometimes it can be so simple and a cop-out, and sometimes it's what a client wants to hear anyway, is to say, what do you charge an hour? And then they benchmark, they have a benchmark. And that's, that's something easy that I can report to a client, and it kind of keeps the conversation going sometimes. Mm-hmm. But the fact of the matter is I never price a job just looking at the exact amount of hours I think it's going to take times my hourly rate. That's never how it works. I'm always thinking about the last project for the client. Do I owe them one? Did I take too long? Is this a good opportunity for me? And maybe price will be a factor to get this job, and I want this client, so I'm going to be a little. I might soften up the estimate a little bit. The last time I worked for this guy, he was a pain in the neck. He took 8 weeks to pay me. There are a lot of little factors that enter into pricing, and they're all sort of nuanced. And but I think in the beginning, to answer the question, maybe it does come back to you're going to have to be a little patient with yourself, and you're not going to be making a huge amount of money on each and every conservation job. In fact, you may on a dollars over time basis, you may actually be shocked at how little you're making on an hourly basis. Suck it up, learn, and get that client to come back.
Exactly. I agree entirely. And the thing is, the main thing you have to realize is you're not going to get it right, because even with 25
so
years
true.
of experience, I sometimes get it so wrong. And one of the things that the hidden cost is, as Julia said, the client that you have to spend 4 hours on the phone with negotiating things. Some of the government clients where you have to have 6 conference calls to work out the project schedule, and then they change it on you.
Right.
Right. You know what? If it works out, it'll work out in the end. If you're meant to be a private conservator, you're going to figure it out. You really will.
Agreed.
Great. So last question, Paul. If a client tells you they have chosen another conservator or restorer framer to do a treatment project, do you have any follow-up response you communicate if you are concerned the client has chosen a less qualified conservator?
That's a tough question. I mean, that really is a tough question, and that happens actually a fair amount. It's a difficult position for a conservator to be in, and I tend to just zip it, frankly. I don't know of a good, solid, ethical way to kind of be a whistleblower in a situation like that. And we've had this conversation about private practice now for two sessions now, or whatever. I don't know how many hours, and no one's brought up certification. And I'm just going to bring it up and say certification, I think, would have been the private conservator's best friend in this regard in particular, because that would have at least given the public some sort of concrete bench line. And me as a conservator, I mean, there are people here in Boston still that work out at the back of frame shops and things like that are terrible, and I ethically I feel on one hand very torn when I hear people taking work to them. I guess the one thing that you can say is just please, before you make a commitment, ask for references from them and check those references. I guess that's something I have said and could say more, but it's tricky because there are a lot of people out there who charge a lot less, bring a lot less to the table, and actually in some cases just with photography, it's so easy to destroy an object. And the standards are so low in some cases about photo restoration and all of that. It's just shocking and sad what goes on.
Can I make a comment? I I generally try to follow up with an inquiry or a client if they said, "Oh, thanks for your reply, but we're working with another conservator." A lot of times I don't know who that might be, but it's fine. They went to them for whatever reason. If I hear that someone is taking an artifact somewhere where I think it's questionable, and that could include a framer or allied professionals, I really just try to explain to them the difference between restoration and conservation. Um, in fact, there are people out there that want to have their quilt restored instead of conserved, and I explain the difference and say you can find restorers, but I'm not one of those people. So I try to explain the difference. I've never, reported or contacted anyone and said, this is troublesome what you're doing. I try to keep my own ethics, very clear, and I make that clear to my clients and also to my colleagues. And the only time I've ever reported anything was when an artifact came into my studio, and I'm 100% certain it was stolen. So I took a photograph of it, I refused to take the work, and I sent it to Interpol.
Wow.
So that's a different question, though.
Well, let me weigh in on this one too. My feeling is this: when we do a proposal for a client, even for the smallest thing, we have a boilerplate list of what our firm's credentials are, and we just tack it on to the end of the proposal. If it's a new client, it says who we are, what we've done, that I'm a fellow of the AIC, what my colleagues, and we just stick that training in there and who our references are, so that up front they have our credentials. If they decide that they're going to someone else, they've seen my credentials and they've made that choice. And my feeling is I probably dodged a bullet. That's kind of the way I look at it right now. You want to look at my credentials and you want to choose someone else? It could be one of my really good colleagues, and great, whatever. If it's one of my colleagues, competitors that I know and trust and like, then it's just a matter of maybe their prices were better, whatever. But if it's based on my credentials, you go to like a restorer or somebody with less training or whatever, I feel like good luck. And I'm always really pleasant about it. No problem. If you need any help in the future, if you should find yourself needing some assistance, feel free to call me with any questions.
Okay. Well, great. I think that wraps up all of our questions. So I want to thank Rosa, Julia, and Paul again. We really appreciate how much time you have put into answering these questions. And thanks to everyone who submitted a question. We hope this program was useful to you. In closing, ECPN would also like to remind listeners that the AIC Specialty Group, Conservators in Private Practice, or CIPP, exists to provide its members a forum to exchange information, suggestions, and tips on running private practice conservation businesses. CIPP has a discounted $5 student rate. You can find more information about CIPP and how to join it, along with useful resources and links on the AIC website. So thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.